Did you know that in Ecuador, if you're offered something and you reject it, people will think that you're rude? Yeah, seriously, and while it does apply to many things, where it most applies to is to food. And this is also where I think it's the most ridiculous. Because when you think about it, when it comes to food, there are foods that you just simply don't like, or if it's your first time even seeing that food, it's pretty tough to bring yourself to eat it, don't you think? But to make sense of why people might think that this is rude, let's look at two things. First, let's imagine that this is the first time that you've met these people, the first time that you guys have gone out, or maybe even the first time that you've visited their house. This could be a way of making you feel welcome, or making you feel a part of their home, or even a part of their culture. And second, let's assume that you already know these people for a long time. This could be a way of them showing you that they trust you. So by rejecting these offers, people might feel hurt. But anyways, I think it's okay for you to say no when you're offered something and not be forced to accept it. Which is why this is my first, almost ridiculous, Ecuador fact. And yes, first, because we still have 12 more almost ridiculous Ecuador facts, with the last 3 which just don't make sense sometimes. Now, second on our list of almost ridiculous Ecuador facts is a situation we have with food. And the situation is that people don't consider a meal to actually be a meal unless it has both rice and a protein. Literally, if you just sit down and eat some chicken or some meat or just a protein, people will start questioning you, where's the rice? And they'll start telling you that you're gonna be hungry because you don't have rice. I can only imagine that this happens because most families grow up eating rice with some kind of protein their whole lives. So it's very weird to see someone else having a meal that doesn't include these 2 things. And there are some cases that there are people who have families that won't even consider rice and a protein to be a full meal, but you also have to have a soup. But I digress. It's ridiculous to me, but let me know what you think. Now moving on, our next 2 facts have something to do with people's names. Did you know that people with the name Maria don't like being called Maria? I know, a lot of people are gonna think that's pretty ridiculous, especially if you live in a country where the name Maria is probably all over the place. But over here, most people with the name Maria normally combine their name Maria with their second name, and you always have to call them the combination of those 2 names or their second name and not Maria. Just some examples that come to mind are Maria Emilia, Maria Sol, or Maria Grazia. But there are definitely many others. And the 4th fact, which is also about names, is the fact that people have some really crazy names here. It seems to be a Manabí thing, but remember, people in Manabí might not just stay in Manabí, and they might travel all over the country and live in different parts of the country. And while I'm sure that there are people who are gonna say that there are some pretty crazy names out there, I don't think any of them top the list that I'm gonna show you right now.
And while these are strange, these are just the ones that were publicly available. Could you imagine the rest?
Moving on to our 5th almost ridiculous Ecuador fact is a situation we have with holidays. Basically, it's the fact that holidays that land on a Tuesday, a Wednesday, or even a Thursday are typically moved closer to the weekends. To give you an example of what that looks like, if there's a holiday on a Tuesday, then it'll probably be moved to Monday in order to create a 3-day weekend. Or inversely, if the holiday is on a Wednesday or a Thursday, it might be moved to Friday in order to once again create a 3-day weekend. And while I do remember this being a thing that when I first got here in Ecuador wasn't a law, eventually it did become a law, and now, since it's a law, it has to happen. Every time that there's a holiday in those 3 days of the week, it has to be transferred to either Friday or Monday. Part of me does think that it's cool, since if you move it next to the weekend, it becomes like a mini vacation. But at the same time, I would feel kind of uncomfortable if I had to celebrate a 4th of July on a day that's not 4th of July. Which some of you might say is irrelevant since I am living in Ecuador, but I do like to respect my United States holidays as well. And since we just mentioned holidays, let's talk about recalentado. What is recalentado? Well, basically, recalentado is leftovers. And if you're wondering what is so weird about leftovers, it's the fact that here, leftovers seem to last forever when it's a holiday. I'm not even joking. Whenever it's Christmas or New Year's or any holiday that involves some big turkey leg or some kind of pork, it always seems to last for a week, and in some exaggerated cases, 2 weeks. That's why people end up making memes that they're sick and tired of recalentado, or even before they have the leftover recalentado thing, they're already suffering, thinking about, oh no, it's almost time for recalentado. I still find it weird that in a culture where we offer food to visitors, or we end up eating a lot ourselves, that we can have so much leftovers for such a long period of time. But it is something that happens. But now let's move on to a more aggressive, almost ridiculous fact. And it has to do with sports. Did you know that here, there is a huge rivalry between two teams in Ecuador? While I did use the word rivalry, it almost seems like an all-out fight between Emelec and Barcelona. These are both soccer teams of Ecuador, and if you're a fan of one, you're instantly an enemy of the other. You might think it's an exaggeration, or that it's just the way that people who talk about sports are. But I think it becomes kind of awkward when people that you just met look at you funny just because you're a fan of the team that they're not a fan of. And don't even get me started with the stereotypes there are for each team. We can talk about that at a later date. Now, fact number 8 might actually be a hot topic, and it has to do with alcohol. Basically, whenever it comes to an outing, there always needs to be alcohol when you're in Ecuador. I think it's ridiculous because before you even ask who's going, people are already asking how much do I have to put in order to pitch in for the alcohol that they're gonna buy. And the reason why I think it's a hot topic is because I think that this happens worldwide, and I think that people are too dependent on alcohol to have fun. And I'm not saying that you can't go out and have fun with alcohol. That's completely okay. But if it's every single outing where people are asking for there to be alcohol, it just seems a bit excessive. Not to mention that in some situations, I don't think that the alcohol is being used to have fun. Now, our next fact, number 9, is one that I actually got from a friend. And my friend says that people who go to live in another country, even if it's just for a month or a few months, come back and act like they've lived in that country their whole lives. The reason that I think that my friend thinks it's ridiculous is because my friend is thinking of ridiculous in the way that people talk about ridiculous here. When people think of something as ridículo here, it's kind of like silly, like dumb, like kind of like exaggerated in a way. So to my friend, when someone leaves the country and they start to believe that they're from somewhere else or act like they're from that other place, it's kind of like that person who went to the other place now thinks that they're better than everyone else. And believe me, it does happen where there are people who go to another country and then they come back and then they start talking about how, oh, over here it was better, or oh, over here things are different. And of course, there's a point where that's a good thing, where you actually talk about the way that you can improve the situation in your country. But most of the time, people who start talking like that are more saying like, things are bad over here, and they weren't like that over there. So it's not like constructive criticism, it's more like hurtful and harmful criticism. The reason why I would think it's ridiculous is because those same people tend to be the people who say they love Ecuador, but they never really support it. But you know, to each their own. Now, our next 2 facts do actually relate to each other, with number 10 being the fact that people will tell you that they're going to be 5 minutes late when that's not actually ever really the case. Literally no one seems to want to admit that they're going to be late, and they would rather tell you, I'll be there in 5 minutes, and at this point you already know that 5 minutes is not really 5 minutes. And the reason why it relates to fact number 11 is because there are also times that people will tell you that they're busy and they're not actually really busy. And you'll notice because since there's a lot of use of social media such as Instagram and WhatsApp, mainly WhatsApp or WhatsApp, you'll see that they post stories when they're supposedly busy doing something else that doesn't really show that they're busy. I think both of these are almost ridiculous because people pretty much lie to your face in both scenarios, and are willing to just cover it up in ways that don't really make sense. Like with the 5-minute example, you already know it's a lie because people say that all the time. So you know that that person is either 30 minutes or an hour away. And it's so commonly accepted that no one even complains. And with the stories and even the 5 minutes, wouldn't it just be easier to say that you're going to be busy and you're not going to be able to make it on time and that you're going to be late or that you just can't do it at all? And that can be the worst part. When people tell you that they're busy or that they're going to be 5 minutes late, they might not even show up at all. And it's so ridiculous to me because all you have to do is say you're going to be late or that you're not going to be able to make it at all, and I think people will understand. But now, because the people here are accustomed to these two things, it's just become a part of the culture. And I don't know about you, but it's pretty crazy to me. And I do like my buddy Don Shader's take on the situation because he does say that the way people perceive time here is a little bit different. There's a little bit less of a rush to do things. And that's okay, but like I said earlier, I think if there were a little bit more communication, honest communication, there wouldn't be any problems with being a little late or not being able to make it at all. And speaking of communication, there is also the fact that people seem to get upset that if you're chatting with them and you send them a message and you end the message with a period, people instantly think that you're mad at them. To me, it's obviously ridiculous because a period is the grammatically correct way to end a sentence, but in that same way, I become so used to it that even I feel bad sometimes when someone ends their sentence with a period. I can't say that I'm 100% sure why this happens, but if I had to speculate, if we look at the way conversations flow over here, there tends to be a lot of messages that go back and forth, and even in normal conversations, a lot of back and forth. So a period might feel like a forced way of ending a conversation. Instead of just saying, see you later, if you just put a period, it's like the person might feel like, oh no, they're cutting the conversation. Did I say something wrong? Whether that is or isn't the case, it's an almost ridiculous thing that even I've gotten sucked into. But one thing that I haven't gotten sucked into is the strange rivalry there is between people from the coast and people from the highlands, which is a random fact that I mentioned in this video, which you should definitely check out next.